Hello, I'm Robert, voluntary fact checker and helping if you're scared of many things. And this is about Admiral Radakin, and he said that Russia will not attack NATO at all, never mind with nukes. And he gives his reasons. He talks about NATO's vast overmatch to Russia. Now I need to explain to you, first of all, who Admiral Radakin is for the background. He's very credible. He knows more about the Ukraine war than just about anyone. He'd have access to the same level of intelligence, secret intelligence, as anyone in NATO, and he's the former head of the UK Defence Staff. So he's the head of the UK Defence, and he retired at the end of September. So he won't have classified access anymore. But right up to that point, he had access to all the UK intelligence, all the intelligence shared with the United Kingdom. He was frequently in Ukraine. He had access to Ukrainian classified intelligence as well. He was very, very close friends to Ukraine. He was constantly back and forth. He's the one general outside of Ukraine who has most understanding of Ukraine in the entire world, I would say. The generals in the United States, they don't travel to Ukraine for some reason. And Admiral Radakin, he's the one who travelled there most of all. And I'm sure he'll continue that close association now he's retired. But so he understands Ukraine very well, he understands the United Kingdom very well. Through intelligence, he understands Russia very well, and he understands Putin very well. And so, based on that vast experience, vast understanding, he says that Russia is not going to attack NATO. So now let's go and see why he says that. So he says, says first of all that if you have superiority in the air and in the sea, there's not much that any other country can do on the land. That's basically what he's saying. But let's look at the quotes from him. First of all, he starts his speech saying, "We are so extraordinarily strong compared to our principal threat, Russia." And then he says that it's difficult to answer in public because it's classified information, that is. But just better just as it is. But the question that people should ask him, which he wouldn't be able to answer properly, is if we were get into a war with Russia, how quickly could we get control of the air? He didn't ask could they get control of the air, but how quickly could they get control of the air? And then it's the same for the sea. How quickly could NATO get control of the sea in any area where there were a dispute? So there's not even a question as to whether NATO would get control of the air. So it would have complete air control of whatever airspace the fighting is happening in, including border areas of Russia if they needed to. And it's just a question of how quickly it would be. And from open source information, like ex-fighter pilots and people who are very knowledgeable about the F-35 fighter jets, then they say that if Ukraine had access to like a few dozen, maybe just even a few F-35 fighter jets, then by the next day they would have control of the entire airspace of occupied Ukraine and into border areas of Russia if they needed. And they would then, at their leisure, they would be able to destroy any Russian fighter jets that tried to come near them, even though they were over occupied Ukraine. They'd be able to see them before the Russian fighter jets could see them on radar, and their range would be greater, and then they'd be able to shoot out all the air defences that tried to look at them before they could even be seen by them. And then, with no air defences left over occupied Ukraine, and with no fighter jets able to come anywhere near them, they'd have complete control of the airspace over occupied Ukraine, including Crimea, including border areas of Russia. And then, at their leisure, they could hit whatever they like from the air. And in that situation, you can be sure that Putin would just withdraw. There's no point in continuing to fight when the other side's got control of the air. It would be very much like when Israel took over Iran and took over the airspace of Iran. And they could just bomb it at their leisure, and there was nothing. The Iranian had fighter jets, but they were so old, all they could do is fly away and hide in caves and get as far away as they could from the Israeli F-16s, Well, it'll be the same with the F-35s and whatever Russia might try to bring, because it's got nothing to match it. So you've got the vast overmatch in the air, then in the sea, then NATO has got a large number of aircraft carriers. Russia has none. Not even one. Russia is technically a brown water navy, which means its navy can only protect the Russian coastline. And it's not considered able to mount anything very much beyond the limits of its coastline. And it hasn't got an aircraft carrier, so that means it can't carry fighter jets with it. So even not taking account of NATO's vast superiority in the air, but Russia can't even get fighter jets because it hasn't got anything to carry them on to project it further away. And Russia's got no bases. I explained in my last video about how they lost the base on the Mediterranean, the Tartus port, and that means they've got no bases outside the former Soviet Union anymore. So the NATO has a huge overmatch in the sea, and got a huge overmatch in the air. And when it comes to the land, then admittedly Russia does have loads and loads of soldiers, but not with very good equipment. And the result of the Ukraine war has been, first of all, NATO has realised quite how much of an overmatch it has in the air from the very poor performance of the Russian air defences and of the Russian fighter jet pilots and the pilots. Even with the equipment they had, they knew that theirs was better. They didn't know quite how much better or how badly trained the Russian fighter pilots are. And so it's very clear from the Ukraine war that Russia is just nowhere near a match for NATO. If Russia had NATO's capabilities, they would have taken over the entire airspace of Ukraine in the first day. And they never took over any of the airspace except over occupied Ukraine, even through the first year, even well before Ukraine got its air defences in the fall. That's how bad, against just 50 to 100, I'm not sure, few dozen fighter jets on the Ukrainian side and 10 times as many on the Russian side, but they couldn't leverage that advantage to take over the Ukrainian airspace, even when Ukraine didn't have had hardly any air defences to speak of. So that is how feeble Russia is compared to NATO, which is vastly superior to what Ukraine was back then. So he says that they used to talk about, before the Ukraine war, in NATO, they used to talk about how if Russia was to take over a small bit of territory in NATO, then they would fight to get it back. Now they are confident that if Russia was to just try to take a little bit of NATO territory, they could block it immediately and would not be able to take it. So that's been a huge change in NATO. And it's partly because of just discovering how weak Russia really is, and partly because of the strengthening of Russia. I talked in my previous video about how Russia has been stimulating NATO over and over again to just get stronger, as if that was Putin's main objective in the war. If that was his objective, he would hardly have done it any differently, to try and make NATO as strong as possible. So he says we are extraordinarily strong compared to our principal threat to Russia, and it's classified information, but if we were to get in a war, how quickly could we get control of the air? He didn't say could we get control, just how quickly could we get control. And the answer would seem to be, unless it's a very large, maybe controlling the whole of the airspace of Russia would take a bit longer, but certainly and it's a pretty large area, the occupied area of Ukraine, that would be done in well less than a day. So, and then if we, and again, how quickly the ability to have control of the sea for NATO is phenomenal. They've got vast overmatch by way of sea capabilities. Then the land forces, they no longer think that if Russia was to gain a piece of territory, how do we fight to get it back? It's now how quickly can it get its land forces in there to block any risk of aggression and territory being grabbed. These are, that's just quoting from Radakin, I'm not paraphrasing, those are his actual words. And so he says, I feel incredibly confident that that's what NATO's got, and that's how NATO can keep its citizens safe. And it's the overmatch that deters Russia. And I've never been clearer than any time in my career about the success that NATO is having in deterring Russia. I've got the video embedded further down. You can click to it and listen to him saying all this. So he says, and then as I've highlighted at the bottom here, Russia does not want to fight with NATO, and Russia does not want a nuclear war, and we should be really confident of that. So that's Admiral Radakin, and he's extremely well informed, very experienced, very knowledgeable on this topic area. I would say he's the best authority we have. So now, some of you who followed me will know that I've said these things before. Now, Radakin has said before that Russia's not going to attack NATO. It's the first time he spelled it out. I've spelled it out, but I've kind of teased out what he must mean. And now he's just saying exactly what I've been saying, which gives a lot of confidence that I'm on the right track. So let's just go and look down that. So these extraordinary times, and then this is on through to his last day as Chief of Staff on 2nd December. These extraordinary times, but the United Kingdom remains safe, and it's something to be celebrated, elevated, strengthened, and preserved for the next 25 years. Oh, that's how his relationship with America. Britain's been a beneficiary of a remarkable defence construct for the last 75 years. Strongest alliance, NATO. And so now this is the actual detailed response which I quoted from. It's the overmatch that deters Russia. I've never been clearer than any time in my career about the success that NATO is having in deterring Russia. Russia does not want to fight with NATO. Russia does not want a nuclear war, and we should be really confident about that. And then he says, we've got a dangerous, malevolent Russia. We need to maintain that advantage, and the best way of maintaining that advantage is for all of us to get a bit stronger. I've got the complete transcript there. There's the video, so you can listen to it. And so now, yes, I talked about the drones. That's my previous video, and the fighter incursions. So I've talked about that before, my previous video, black flashing drones. And nothing changed. Oh, so that is pretty much, oh yes, that is my previous video in a section of this one. So now I just want to talk at the end. Yeah, so that's already in the previous video. Right, so now, so I talked about it in that previous video, so that kind of slots in here. And so now this is stuff that I found out previously. So this is what I was talking about, how if Ukraine got the F-35s, could dominate the airspace of occupied Ukraine and liberate it fast. It's not remotely plausible, but that's what it could do. So here we have, this is a detailed analysis which explains how. What this suggests is that an F-35 in Ukraine, that's just one F-35, would likely enable its air force to quickly eliminate Russia's fleet of fourth-generation aircraft and establish air supremacy. Yeah, this seems to be just talking about a single F-35. If they were to give one F-35 to, yes, a single F-35, here we go. And with air supremacy, they'd be able to attack from the air essentially at will and track and destroy Russian ground forces with little difficulty. So the point is that once you've got your F-35s there, then all the other ones, even quite ancient fighter jets, they can fly over the same space and they're protected by the F-35, so they can fly too. So and this is about how they don't have any aircraft carriers. These are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 US aircraft carriers, which are the leader of a strike group. And Russia has none. China has them, but China's can only travel as far as the Philippines because they don't have nuclear aircraft carriers. And then the Britain has 2. France has 1. That's the one that you could. What's this about? Oh yes, it's rather ironic. Ukraine built Russia's aircraft carriers, and that's the actual factory that built it. We're still there in Ukraine, though it's no longer making aircraft carriers. And that's that. And this is the that's the one that they used to have. They got rid of it. I think that's it. That's what I'm talking about. So yes. So I was just talking there about the overmatch in the sea. So that's about the aircraft carriers. How Russia just doesn't have any aircraft carriers anymore, and without an aircraft carrier, you can't project force. And then the other bit was about the F-35s and how vastly superior the F-35 fighter jets are compared to anything that Russia has at present. And NATO is going on to the next generation, the sixth generation already. So I hope you can understand this. And so there's no way that Russia is going to use nukes. They're not going to. The nukes don't. People have fancy ideas about nukes. I don't talk about that in this debug. But nukes just don't achieve anything. They're only for defense. They have no real military value. They can't. You can't win a war with nukes. Because all that would happen is you'd be isolated. Russia would be isolated from the entire world. Even his own citizens would be completely opposed to him. He'd achieve nothing to protect his country. He'd achieve nothing by the way of taking over any other country. All he'd do is lose, and other countries might lose too, but he's not gaining anything whatsoever. He's losing, just losing. So it's what they call, it's not been sometimes not explained very well. A nuclear war is lose. Both sides lose, and Russia would lose massively. And it just isn't a rational thing for anyone to do, no matter how. It has nothing to do with being cross or emotional. He doesn't act out of emotions anyway. It's nothing to do with, it's not like that if he gets very, very angry, he could somehow achieve something with nukes. Nothing can make nukes of any value to Russia to actually use them. They're completely pointless weapons. Partly because of the stigma, because the very smallest nukes could actually achieve something of military value if it wasn't for the stigma that if he was to use tiny tactical nukes in Ukraine, then he'd lose completely all his support from China and India, which every year they both ratified, vote to eliminate all nukes as quickly as possible. They're very anti any use of nukes. And and then when it gets anything bigger, then it's just going to harm him far more. And NATO would respond not because of how very weak Russia is in the air and on the land. We don't know their secret plans, but they would respond much more sensibly by just shooting them all down, taking over the Russian airspace, and really Russia would likely be forced in a position where it has to give up its nukes, and Putin ends up in prison for the rest of his life if he isn't killed in a coup by other people in the Kremlin. So there's just no way that Russia is going to use nukes, and so you can forget about that. And Radakin says that Putin isn't even thinking about that. He wouldn't even think about that. So let's get a quote of what he said. Russia does not want to fight with NATO, and Russia does not want a nuclear war, and we should be really confident of that. So I hope that is Admiral Radakin saying that, not me. And I'm just kind of filling in with some of the things that he doesn't say, partly because it's classified, and partly because people don't ask him to go into details. And so I hope this helps you be much less scared about this whole idea, and just have a little bit of something else to counteract the things that people say that really don't work and don't make sense. And you need to ask yourself, why are they doing it? Is it just to get attention? Is it, but for whatever reason, this is the bona fide truth here. That's the facts of the matter, and there are loads and loads of precautions in place to prevent anything like this accidentally as well. Lots of like the way that fighter jets, and when they meet each other, and the NATO's rules of engagement, and then when they have exercises and the rules to just make sure, and then every time that, for instance, that Putin fires an ICBM, or when he fired his Oreshnik, in test flights, which every nuclear power does every year, then he always notifies the United States, as the United States notifies him, and he's very, very careful to make sure that nobody mistakes it for being a real launch. So at least there's a huge amount being done to make sure that it can't happen accidentally, and nobody's ever going to do it for real. And there's no way that Putin could actually attack the far stronger NATO in reality. So anyway, hope that helps.